Hi again. So today I wanted to talk a little bit about expectations. Expectations we put on ourselves, expectations that others put on us as adoptive parents. And I didn't really predict that it was going to be so hard to meet the expectations, to meet my own expectations that I didn't even know I had until the kids came home. And so I think it starts pretty much as soon as the kids do come home. Actually, no, back up. It starts before that. You have social workers in Uganda. They call them probation officers, which means something very different in North America, I realize, but it's sort of the same thing, community social workers, who are basically critiquing you at every level of your life, including the baby homes. And the governments, everyone is analyzing you and critiquing you. And they have these expectations that you are essentially a perfect being. That means any medical issues you've had in the past, especially mental health issues. Mental health issues are so taboo, especially in the developing world. And so if you've had ever any issues with depression or anxiety, you really have to be careful about what you disclose to people, because they may decide that you're unfit to have children because you've struggled with mental health in your past. Even if it's under control and it's not affecting you today, that could prevent you from having children. So you have all these expectations thrown on you from the very beginning to pretty much be perfect. My husband and I face a lot of questions about our faith, because we're an interfaith marriage, which means my husband's Muslim and I'm Christian, but the baby home we were adopting from is Christian. And so they were very curious as to how we were going to raise our children when it came to our faith. And it actually helped a little bit to be in Uganda, because we answered in a way that was very truthful, that we meant to, expose our kids to both religions, and that we would be respectful of each other's religions, as we've always been, and sort of provide information on both to our children, and let them, as they get older, make their decisions, because really that's what people do anyway. And in Uganda, they were very respectful of that and very understanding of that, because they respect Islam and Christianity equal here. So, but that was we were terrified for these interviews, because they were analyzing details of our life that we had never even thought of. And in Uganda, no questions are off limits. So, for instance, my husband was asked what would happen if he took a second or third wife, which is a skewed view of Islam. But it was a serious question that we had to answer, and just things that would never even be asked in Canada were expected to sort of be nitpicked of us. And so we literally had to present ourselves as these perfect people who nobody is. And so from the very beginning, you're stressed out all the time, making sure that your house is perfect, that you have the right number of rooms, a number of beds, obviously a bed for each kid, but the right number of rooms, and that you have proper, all the safety precautions are taken, and things that, like, my friends who have kids, who are biological kids, never even think of. Like, they have bunk beds in a room, not a big deal. And so all these expectations that you just, would never have put on you as a biological parent suddenly are flooding you when you start the adoption process. So that's before the kids even come home. Then the kids come home. And for us, because our children weren't newborns, our daughter came home when she was 3, our son came home when he was about 1.5 years, but he was developmentally much behind that, like maybe 8 months old in development. And so Abel was incredibly neglected in the baby home. Because he had hydrocephalus for so long untreated, he became very underdeveloped. And so while he should have been already standing and potentially walking at 1.5, he wasn't even able to bear weight on his legs. And so and for our daughter, who, she doesn't have hands, but she's incredibly smart, so smart. But because there's an association here for some reason that, like, if a child has a physical difference, that their mind is also affected. And so they would treat her like a baby. And so she was still being fed with the 1-year-olds when she was 3, which means she was basically always eating soft foods, nothing really solid. They were always helping her eat instead of letting her try to do it on her own. In the classroom, they have a class, which was really not a class, but she really was treated like a baby. And so when she came home, her mind was just so stagnant, like she needed stimulation. So when our kids came home, I had this insane expectation of myself to catch them up, to stimulate them constantly. And so my son came home first, 4 months earlier actually, And I took him to have a full assessment done, physiotherapy, occupational therapy, speech therapy, everything. They basically just said he has global delay. Everything is delayed. They wanted me to bring him at 1.5 years old to this facility every day for 8 hours a day for him to be worked with, which seemed insane to me as a 1.5-year-old. I mean, he napped like 3 times a day because of his hydrocephalus. He was tired all the time. There was no way he was going to make it more than an hour or two. And also, he hated physiotherapists. As soon as they would put him on those physiotherapy mats, he would freak out because it would remind him of the trauma that he experienced in the baby home. And so I knew that wasn't an option for me. So because I have a scientific training background and some medical training, I decided that I would undertake it on my own. And so every day we would work together for at least an hour, trying to get him to practice these different exercises. And every day it was nursery rhymes in the morning and trying to get him to say different sounds constantly. We would be going for walks together. Don't get me wrong, we enjoyed our time together and we loved our time, but always in my head, I was concerned that I wasn't stimulating him enough, that now that he came home so delayed, it was my job to get him back to where he was supposed to be so that he could have a full life and that he wasn't going to experience any sort of delays that were unnecessary. And so instead of allowing other people to help me, and in Uganda, truly what I was doing at home was what they would have been doing in the baby home, in the facility, in the physiotherapy, in this occupational therapy facility. But they were going to charge exorbitant amounts of money because I'm an international resident. So they were going to charge money that we just didn't have. And I just felt like I could do it on my own. And then when Malika came home, every day we would spend time doing the alphabet. And by the time she was 3.5, she could read small words and spell small words. She knew the entire alphabet and what the sounds were. She knew all her numbers, her letters, everything. Her numbers, her colors, her letters, everything. She knew nothing when she came home, not a single thing, because I didn't teach her anything. But her mind was just craving these things, that when she came home, I took it upon myself to make sure that she was being stimulated. So we got puzzles for her and coloring, and I wanted her to learn how to be able to do things for herself, so she didn't always rely on other people to do that, which meant that I was teaching her how to do things, but then I had this expectation that I had to teach her everything. And one of the things that I had to do with Malika, which wasn't easy for me, was to learn to step back and allow her to figure things out on her own. Because an example is when she gets dressed in the morning and puts her shirts on, I was always trying to teach her how to do it with her arms, because she has one joint and then one short arm without a joint. And so I was always trying to show her with her arms how she could do things. And then one day, actually, because I was frustrated with her, because she was acting like a baby even though she wasn't, I just got frustrated. And I said, today you're going to find out what you can do on your own. You're going to learn your limitations and you're going to learn your strengths. And that entire day, I made her do everything on her own. It took her an hour to figure out how to get her panties down the first time to go to the potty, but she figured it out. Now she does it in like 30 seconds. But that day, I was just like, no, you're going to figure this out. And she got mad at me, but every time she accomplished something, she was so proud of herself. And that was sort of a lesson for me that I had to step back. The expectations that I had of myself were too much, and that I had to allow her to also take the lead and to start determining how things worked best for her. And now when she gets herself dressed, she uses her toes to pull her shirt over her head, which if I was going to show her how to do it, I would never be able to because I'm not flexible enough. So that was never even an option in my mind. But she figured it out, and it's what was easiest for her. So I had to sort of let myself step back from that. But then we also have these expectations then, like from the social workers, from the probation officers. We also have them on ourselves about making sure our children catch up from all the time they've spent in the orphanage, being neglected and understimulated. You want to just like get them home and stimulate them. Like you want to have their first everything, first ice cream cone, first time at a water park, first time at a playground, everything, first, because you just want to stimulate them and catch them up on what they've missed. But what you don't have in perspective at that point is that you have years, you have the rest of their lives with them to be able to experience these things. And sometimes it was just more important to just be with them and to just allow them a few days at home where they didn't do anything other than just play however they wanted to play and to have no interference from me whatsoever, and to just allow them to be kids and not worry about catching them up, because truthfully everything they were experiencing at home was full of stimulation and full of things that were expanding their horizons and their mind. The other thing that I've noticed among adoptive mothers or parents is that we have this very strange competitiveness with each other. And it's something that I've experienced with a few people specifically, but I've heard it's very common amongst adoptive parents, where it's like if you say, for instance, I was having a hard time bonding with my daughter when she first came home, and then speaking to another adoptive parent, it was like, oh, well, I didn't experience that. And maybe she has fear. Maybe there's a disconnect, because I never experienced that. We've just had a connection from the beginning, or when it's like would hear Malika doing ABCs or whatever, and it's like, oh, mine doesn't know how to do it yet, but she knows how to do this. And it's like, okay, that's great, but it's not a competition between our kids. It's almost like, as parents, we're putting our kids in these like competitions with each other. It's like they all come home with trauma, and it's like, who can figure out the trauma first? Who can figure out how to overcome it? Who can be the best parent? And I'm not saying I was innocent of this. There was definitely times where not purposefully to invoke jealousy or to make people feel bad, but like to post the things that were happening, because I was really excited that my kids were figuring out these things and doing these things. But often I felt that judgment from people, where it was like, oh, you're spending time doing that. Oh, well, we did this, and we got a different outcome. And our kids have, oh, your child still wets the bed? Oh, wow, we've never had to deal with that. Or ours, we haven't dealt with that in a long time, since they first came home, or whatever, right? And it's those issues of like, every kid is different. Every kid has different traumas. Every kid has different personalities and ways of dealing with things. And so to say that just because we've all adopted, suddenly we should be having the same experience after, because truthfully, we have a lot of the same experiences going into it. We all have similar experiences dealing with probation officers and lawyers and social workers and baby homes or orphanages. We all feel those things the same. And so when the kids come home, suddenly it's like we still expect that our experiences are going to be the same. And they're not. They're so unique. Every kid is unique, and every story is going to be unique. Every parent is unique. And so everything's going to work differently. Every child is going to progress differently. Every family is going to do things differently. And so, to sort of put that judgment on each other, and to always sort of almost be like bragging about what our kids can do versus what other kids can do. And I mean, the best way to handle that is when the parents think they're having a hard time, commiserate with them, talk to them, tell them that, it's going to be okay, come up with ways of maybe dealing with things, or just listen, instead of offering the fact that your kids don't have those issues. Because truth is, your kids probably have different issues. And I mean, it also goes back to the fact that kids are meant to be where they end up for a reason. Because I believe that adoptive parents are meant to have those children. And so those children come with needs and that the adoptive parents know how to meet. And so you're right, you probably couldn't necessarily have my kids and deal with them the same way we deal with them. But probably the same would go if you reverse the roles, where I probably couldn't deal with some of the issues in some of these other children that have other traumas and other issues. So let's just build each other up. Let's take off these expectations we have of each other. And by having this competitiveness between us, it just makes those expectations on ourselves worse, because we see what other people are doing with their kids and then think that we should be doing the same things, or meeting the same goals, or having the same experiences. And it's just not going to happen. So let's cut the judgment, cut the crap, and just support each other and love each other. Then the other expectations that we face as adoptive parents are from society once the kids are home. And so my experience is a little different, because I do live in the country where the children are from. And so I experience a lot of expectations and judgment from people in the community. But from Ugandans and also from non-Ugandans, we have people that think it's their right to express concerns about how we will share their culture with them. And they're in a white family, which means we're going to westernize them when they're not Western children. And there's all these concerns that people have, and people will stare at you, and they'll make comments about not understanding your children because they're not from the same culture. So I already have people looking at me all the time, and if my kids do anything that isn't perfect, in other words, if they whine or cry, or if they get upset about something, or if they're too loud or anything, even though, I mean, kids in Uganda, all those things happen all the time, but because I look different than my kids, there's these incredible expectations that my children basically be perfect, and therefore that I be a perfect parent. In other words, if my kids cry in a taxi, I have people offering me all sorts of advice as to why they're crying, even though I know why they're crying. And so there have been multiple examples of this. There was this one instance where my husband and I had taken our son for a haircut, and Abel hates getting his haircut. He's actually afraid of the clippers because in the baby home they used to buzz their heads, and with him, because he didn't have a lot of neck strength, his head would move a lot and he would get nicked all the time. So he hates getting his hair cut. And in African hair, for boys especially, it's always cut with clipper. You can't really use scissors. But he also has incredibly curly hair, so if we don't cut it, it becomes really hard to brush, and then he cries because of brushing. So the cut is actually the lesser of two evils, because at least it only lasts for a short while, and then he's good for like 2 months. But so we got his haircut. Abel was screaming. He'd stopped screaming. He wanted me and not my husband to carry him, but I had my arms full, so I couldn't, so he started screaming. And so we were going to take him for ice cream after his haircut, but when he just was throwing this colossal tantrum, I was like, well, I'm not going to take you for ice cream if you're going to behave like this. Our daughter wasn't home yet at this time. So we had gone down the escalators. My husband had gone to pick something up, and so I was with Abel, and he would not stop because now he wanted ice cream, now he wanted all these things. Well, so I took him into a corner, sort of away from everyone in the mall, and I put him down, and I sat beside him, and I just let him cry it out, and I let him figure it out. This man came up behind when my husband walked over to us. He walked up behind me, he says, "Do you need help with that boy?" And we said, "No, we're okay. Like, he's having a little bit of a rough time. He wants something that we're not willing to give him, and he's crying, but he'll stop soon." He said, "That's not how it works with these children. Let me show you." And my husband stepped in front of him and said, "Sir, I'm going to ask you to leave. This is our child, and we're parenting him, and we're okay." And he basically told Zayd that we didn't know how to parent these children. And if we knew how to parent him, he wouldn't be screaming. And there's these people that just have expectations that we will parent the same way they do. And culturally, we do parent very differently in the West compared to in Africa. And so I'm not opposed to allowing my children to work out a tantrum on their own. I'll sit by them, but I'm not going to coddle them and give them what they want. And so there's these expectations on us that, like, every time I leave the house, I'm worried. Like, I need to have everything right. I need to make sure I have food and water, and I need to make sure I have everything so that there isn't going to be a chance of a tantrum. And if there is, we know how to stop it immediately. And I feel like that wouldn't be the case if the children looked like me, because people would just respect that, like, oh, they're her kids, so we'll just let her deal with it how she chooses. But because they really don't look at my kids here as my kids, every time anything is even remotely off, they think that they should offer advice. My son fell running across the road once, and he was crying, and I had him in my arm. I was holding his arm. And this woman ran across the road and picked him up thinking she could console him. He lost his mind because he wasn't very good with strangers at that point. Started screaming and lost his mind. She didn't understand. So then she's saying, "Silica, silica," which is like, be quiet, be quiet. So then I took him from her. He stopped crying immediately. He nestled into me, stopped crying, and she goes, "Hey, that's good. He stops when you pick him." I said, "Yes, of course. I'm his mom." And no. I said, "I am the only mother that boy knows." And then Abel said, "Mummy," and she understood, I think. But, I mean, a lot of it's educating people for them to understand. But it's really hard to have those expectations that people don't think you know how to handle your children. That if something happens, like in that situation, she didn't think I could stop him from crying when he fell on the ground. I knew exactly what I needed to do. But I had my arm full of groceries, and I needed to get across the road in order to console him because I didn't want to get hit by a car. But again, there's these expectations put on us that we have to be perfect, that our children have to be perfect. And if they're not, then we open the door to unsolicited advice from other people. And so I just think that it becomes very hard. There's things that we deal with as adoptive parents. The expectations we sort of face from everyone to be perfect. And that if we're not, I mean, at the very beginning, you may not even get the child unless you come across as perfect parents and have the perfect home and the perfect jobs and the perfect incomes and perfect marriage. And then once the kids are home, you're constantly being checked, constantly worrying that something is going to not be right when they come and your house isn't going to be perfect. And that when you're out in public, people always expect that if your kids aren't perfect, it's just because you don't know how to parent them yet. You're just getting used to your kids. No, they're kids. Kids throw tantrums. And as a parent, you work through those as best you can with your kids. But I think the worst of all these expectations is the expectations we put on ourselves. We need to lighten up on ourselves. We need to give ourselves a break and understand that, yes, our kids come home with some deficiencies, or they're delayed in certain areas of their life, but they're gonna catch up. They have their whole lives with you. You're gonna make things work with them. You don't have to hit it full blast when they first come home and solve every problem they've ever had. You have time. You take time to just love them and enjoy having them home and doing the things that you have fun doing, rather than always worrying about making sure that what you do is accelerating their education or their minds and their physical abilities. And just make sure that you take that time to enjoy them, because they're only going to be that little once. And you look back at pictures and realize, man, they were little, and I wish I hadn't spent my whole time worried about helping him walk. That would have come with time anyway. So anyway, I think that we just need to give each other a break as parents. When we see people, offer help to them. Don't offer criticism to them, just like for any parent. When you see that their children are having a tough time, and so therefore the parents are having a tough time, I hope that this resonates with people when I'm on a plane with 2 children, a 2 and a 3-year-old, hopefully soon, traveling by myself back to Canada with tons of luggage and moving basically our whole life, that people will, instead of seeing, because inevitably there will be tantrums and meltdowns, probably from all 3 of us, that I'm hoping that people will have that respect and just that compassion and understanding, that they will, rather than judge me, that they'll step in and help as well in a constructive way. But then we also just have to understand that we can't do anything about the government and social workers. We do have to basically appear perfect to them. At this point, there's nothing we can do to change that. But once we get through those hurdles, we just need to give ourselves grace, each other grace, and just love on our kids and enjoy the time we have with them. Anyway, that's all for today. Thanks so much.